The SpaceX IPO is going to be happening soon, and I don't feel very good about it. I feel fearful for the retail investor because I really think this is going to be one of the biggest rug pull on retail investors. Now, I hope I'm wrong, right? I hope that my thesis is wrong and that it makes a lot of investors who get into the SpaceX IPO into millionaires, multimillionaires. But here's a couple of my reasoning on why I don't think this is such a great or good IPO. When I take a look at the revenue of SpaceX, it's the revenue is very similar to a company like Chipotle or a company like Spotify. Yet the valuation that it's being traded at, it's being valued close to a Mag 7. When I first thought about the valuation of this $135 per share, I was thinking in my head, like, how in the hell did this come to be? How did they come up to this valuation? Which banker thought they should be worth that much? Well, in this particular case, because of the power of Elon Musk, that's the IPO price that he picked. He's like, hey, we're gonna make it instead of a range, we're gonna make it a fixed price of $135, and it's take it or leave it price. So this will be very interesting to see how the retail investors, how institutional investors and index funds react to all of this news. What's so interesting about this IPO is that because Elon Musk priced it at around $135 per share, he will need to raise about $75 billion for it to be successful. If he does not raise $75 billion, there's a lot of issues there, right? Which I will go a little bit more in detail about in this video. But the first thing is, how is he going to get the $75 billion, right? Because that's a lot of cash to raise during an IPO. And I can see him raising that cash through three different ways, right? The first tranche would be through retail investors. So out of that $75 billion that he needs to raise, he can raise about 15 to 20 trillion dollars from retail investors. The second tranche is going to be passive index funds. Index funds like the QQQM, the QQQ, the VTI total index funds, those would be an additional 30 billion to $40 billion that he will need to raise from. And if he does so, wow, impressive. Now, the hardest tranche that he needs to raise money from is from long-term institutional investors, from investors like hedge funds, hedge fund managers. And this is the one where I'll be the most impressed if he's able to raise 15 to 20 billions out of them, is because this group is the one that's most skeptical about this company being valued at $135 per share. Because how is a company that has a valuation close to a Mag 7, but only having revenues of like a Chipotle or a Spotify? But the crazy part of all of this is that the company is not even profitable. In fact, it's nowhere near profitability right now. It's a company that's burning through cash, but is requesting so much capital, so much of a high valuation from investors. And if Elon Musk is able to go ahead and raise that $75 billion, huge success. If he is not, there's a couple of issues we got. All right. Let's say he raises $50 billion rather than the original $75 billion. Couple things can happen. Elon Musk can go ahead and just cancel out the IPO, can just withdraw his IPO, keep the company private. Institutional investment banking, they can go ahead and take the cost, go ahead and eat up the loss of $25 billion. And what most likely will happen when that occurs is that those bankers will sell the SpaceX shares, those additional ones, on the open market, causing the stock to plummet. Great. That would be a horrific thing for so many retail investors who would have bought the IPO price of $135. Now, all of this being said, it just doesn't make sense to me on why the valuation of a company being at $135. But recently, what's been most interesting is that when I saw Google trying to raise capital at $80 billion, when I saw Meta trying to raise their own capital to build out all these AI data centers, it started making sense to me, because a lot of these companies are going to start needing capital to build out all this infrastructure. And this is a great way for SpaceX to. I also started thinking about what happens if SpaceX does merge with Tesla, right? That because that's a bullish sentiment right there. That's something that a lot of bullish investors have shared about, hey, if they merge, well, even if SpaceX and Tesla does merge, their revenue still comes closer to about the revenue that Bank of America has. But yet, the valuation again, it just does not make any sense to me whatsoever. And that is my ultimate fear. I really hope that I'm wrong on this and retail investors go ahead and make a crushing here on buying into the IPO, become multimillionaires. But I will be staying out of the stock even after the IPO, because one of the other concerns that I have with the company like SpaceX is that I'm expecting them to be very volatile. Specifically, a rocket company, when they were private and going now to become a public company, it's going to be a lot more pressure. But when you're a public company, because when you're a public company, you have to report earnings every quarter. And if you don't have great earnings, man, your company can have a huge volatility in the stock price. My fear for a company like SpaceX is that, let's say, when you are in the pressure of having to showcase short-term results, imagine having a headline where the rocket launch does not go as expected or it's not as successful. That is going to be a huge volatility spike for a company like SpaceX. And it's another reason, because of the volatility aspect, that I'm expecting for a company like this, that I'm not getting into it. On the good news, it is going to be included in many of the index funds that, or ETFs that is existing right now. The index funds like QQQ, ETFs like VTI, I'm expecting them to be all included, including SpaceX. So that's a bullish sentiment, but everything else, such as profitability, the valuation, those are concerns that I still have for the company.